Every empire believes it is different, more advanced, more stable, more permanent. Yet history shows an unforgiving rhythm, a repeating melody of rise, dominance, and inevitable decline. From the Roman legions marching through Europe, to British ships controlling the seas, to the Soviet banners over half the world, and now the stars and stripes of the United States, every superpower has followed a familiar sequence. The cycle of empire is not an accident. It's a pattern, one written into the DNA of human ambition. At the beginning, an empire rises from chaos, from poverty, from rebellion, or from the ashes of another fallen state. There is hunger in the eyes of its people, a vision that unites them. For Rome, it was conquest. For Britain, trade. For America, freedom, or at least the promise of it. But that hunger, that spark, begins the same way every time, through struggle. Great nations are not born in comfort. They are forged in scarcity, fear, and the will to overcome. Then comes the expansion, the stage of victory and confidence. Roads are built, armies grow, and culture flourishes. The empire becomes the world's model. Its language spreads, its values dominate, its power becomes unquestionable. In this stage, there is optimism, the belief that history itself bends in their favor. The people begin to think the empire is immortal, that the fall of others will never touch them. This is the height of the illusion, but the pattern deepens. Every empire at its peak plants the seed of its downfall. The very success that once united the people begins to divide them. Wealth concentrates. Luxury replaces discipline. The frontier spirit, the one that built the empire, fades into comfort and excess. The citizens no longer fight to build. They fight to maintain their privileges. And quietly, without notice, the cycle begins to turn. The Roman Empire had its bread and circuses, distractions to keep the people calm. The British Empire had its colonies, sources of cheap labor and endless extraction. The United States has its credit system, global markets, and digital distractions. The forms change, but the essence is the same. Keep the population entertained, fed, and unaware that the system is hollowing from within. Historians often debate when decline truly begins. But the answer is simple. It starts not when the empire loses a war, but when it loses its purpose. When comfort becomes the national religion and innovation turns into imitation. When leaders stop leading and start managing decay. When fear replaces faith, not in gods, but in the system itself. And yet there's something hypnotic about this pattern, because every generation thinks they are smarter than the last. This time is different, they say, but it never is. Debt grows. Bureaucracy expands. Values decay. And while the empire spends its wealth maintaining illusions, other nations rise quietly in the shadows, waiting for their moment. History's stage doesn't change, only the actors do. Rome fell. London dimmed, Moscow collapsed, and today the world looks toward Washington, wondering if the torch of decline has already been passed. The pattern of power is not a mystery anymore. It's a mirror. And when we look into it, we don't just see the past, we see ourselves. Every empire at the height of its glory convinces itself that the golden age will never end. The streets are full, markets overflow, and technology seems unstoppable. The people look around and say, "We've made it." But what they don't see is that prosperity, when built on debt and illusion, is the most fragile empire of all. The illusion begins subtly. Growth feels infinite, so spending becomes a habit, not a necessity. Governments promise stability. Banks invent new forms of wealth. The rich get richer, but even the middle class believes it is part of something eternal. In the Roman Empire, it was endless expansion funded by conquered lands. In Britain, it was global trade and colonies. In America, it's credit, consumption, and the digital economy, a system that depends not on production, but on confidence. The illusion of prosperity thrives as long as people believe. When belief becomes the currency, everything seems possible. Stock markets soar, property values explode, and luxury becomes a measure of success. But beneath that surface, cracks begin to form. Productivity slows, innovation stagnates. Every system begins to feed on itself. Politicians print money to buy time, corporations prioritize profit over purpose. The culture shifts from creation to speculation, from builders to betters. And yet, the illusion is maintained through media, marketing, and distraction. You can see it in the tone of every great civilization at its peak. Confidence bordering on arrogance. Rome thought it ruled forever. London believed the sun would never set on its empire. Washington sees itself as the guardian of democracy, but power built on borrowed money and blind faith always fades the same way, slowly at first, then suddenly. If you're still watching this, it means you're not satisfied with surface explanations. You're looking for patterns, truths, and connections the mainstream won't show you, and that's exactly what we uncover here, every single day. So, if you're interested in how history, money, and power shape the world we live in, make sure to subscribe to this channel. We dive into the hidden mechanics of global systems, from the rise of digital empires to the slow collapse of the West, with storytelling that connects the dots others ignore. Because understanding the past is the only way to survive the future. Now, let's return to the empire's illusion. The more prosperous it becomes, the more disconnected it grows from reality. Bread and circuses evolve into entertainment and social media. Instead of gold coins, we print digital dollars. Instead of temples, we have banks. The symbols change, but the religion of wealth remains. And just like in every golden age, the warning signs are ignored. Massive debt, unsustainable spending, social polarization, all dismissed as temporary adjustments. Experts appear on screens, assuring everyone that the system is strong, that there's nothing to worry about. But when an economy becomes addicted to debt and a society addicted to distraction, collapse isn't a question of if, but when. The illusion of prosperity is perhaps the most dangerous stage of all, because it feels the safest. It blinds leaders, sedates citizens, and feeds a false sense of security. The empire believes it's thriving, even as the foundations begin to crumble beneath it. But denial doesn't stop history. It only delays its judgment. Every empire must face the moment when its illusions collide with reality, when debt replaces wealth and fear replaces faith. When the population begins to feel that something is off, even if they can't yet explain why. That's the moment when history quietly shifts direction. And it's the moment we are living right now. Every collapse begins quietly. There's no explosion, no sudden fall, just small, almost invisible shifts that seem harmless at first. A deficit here, a military overreach there, a growing divide between those who have and those who don't. The signs are there, but they're buried beneath comfort, pride, and distraction. The turning point is never one event. It's a series of decisions, each justified in the moment, but disastrous in hindsight. For Rome, it began when the empire could no longer pay its soldiers without debasing its currency. Silver coins turned to copper, then to lead. Inflation soared, trust fell. For the British Empire, it was when debt from 2 world wars drained its global reach and the pound lost its throne to the dollar. For the Soviet Union, it was when ideology replaced reality, when propaganda shouted louder than production. And for America, that turning point may already be behind us. Decline doesn't start with collapse. It starts with denial. Leaders begin to explain away every crisis. A financial crash becomes a correction. A geopolitical defeat becomes strategic repositioning. A cultural fracture becomes diversity of thought. The narrative changes to protect the illusion. And as long as people believe the story, the system continues, even as its core rots away. History shows that the third stage of empire, the beginning of decline, is marked by three consistent traits: economic decay, moral confusion, and loss of purpose. The first comes from endless spending and debt creation. The second, from the erosion of shared values. The third, from forgetting why the empire existed in the first place. It's not the barbarians at the gates that destroy a civilization. It's the corrosion within. In every case, the turning point was hidden in plain sight. Rome's Senate still met as the treasury emptied. The British elite still held balls and ceremonies as India gained independence. Soviet generals still paraded tanks through Red Square as their economy starved. And today, American markets reach record highs, while homelessness, debt, and disillusionment spread like shadows beneath skyscrapers. The data is clear. Productivity has stagnated for decades. Real wages haven't kept up with inflation. The average citizen's savings have evaporated while corporate profits have soared. The empire has stopped producing value and started consuming it. The machine now feeds on itself. Politicians print, corporations borrow, and consumers spend what they don't have to maintain the illusion that all is well. But history has seen this movie before, and it never ends well. There is always a psychological shift that accompanies the decline. People begin to sense something is wrong, but they can't identify it. They feel the ground changing beneath them, institutions losing credibility, promises sounding emptier, and the future feeling uncertain. In this stage, optimism turns into anxiety, and anxiety turns into anger. The social fabric begins to tear. Some cling to nostalgia, others call for revolution. The empire begins to doubt itself, and that doubt is fatal. Foreign powers, once allies, start to test the empire's resolve. Rivals sense weakness. The cost of maintaining global influence rises faster than the returns. Trade partners diversify, resource chains shift, and the empire's currency begins to lose trust. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, and today the rhyme sounds all too familiar. The fall of confidence marks the true turning point. When people no longer trust their leaders, their money, or their institutions, the system starts collapsing from within. The banks still open, the parades still march, the screens still glow, but underneath, something vital has died. The sense of unity, purpose, and belief that once held the empire together is gone. Every empire believes it's different, smarter, stronger, more advanced. Yet every one of them reaches this same moment, when comfort turns to fragility and control turns to chaos. The fall is no longer a possibility. It's a process, one already in motion. The turning point isn't coming, it's here. As empires descend into uncertainty, something remarkable always happens. The silence breaks. Doubts begin to echo in the corridors of power, in the streets, in the minds of citizens who once believed their nation was untouchable. The narrative of invincibility begins to fracture. When you listen closely to history, you can almost hear the same questions whispered again and again. How did it come to this? At first, those doubts are quiet. The Roman senators debating the cost of endless wars. British industrialists realizing their colonies were becoming financial burdens rather than assets. American economists warning that global debt and polarization could ignite crises far beyond control. It always starts with a few lonely voices daring to question the system that once fed them. These are the early murmurs of awakening, fragile, dangerous, but necessary. When decline sets in, truth becomes both a weapon and a threat. The leaders who benefited from expansion now fear exposure. They silence opposition with propaganda, distractions, or patriotic pride. Bread and circuses in Rome, imperial parades in London, digital spectacles in our modern world. The formula doesn't change, only the technology does. But even the most sophisticated narratives cannot drown out reality forever. When living standards stagnate, when corruption becomes impossible to hide, when hope fades, people start talking. And once they start, they rarely stop. Social tension grows, not because people suddenly hate their country, but because they sense betrayal. They see elites growing richer while ordinary citizens carry the burden. They notice that wars are fought for profit, not for principle. They feel that the system, once designed to uplift, now exists to exploit. History tells us that empires rarely collapse because of foreign enemies alone. They implode from within, consumed by cynicism and self-deception. But here's where I want to hear from you. Do you believe this pattern is inevitable? Do you think humanity is doomed to repeat this endless cycle? Rise, exploit, decline, or can we learn to evolve before collapse? Let's open this question together. Drop your thoughts, your theories, even your doubts in the comments below. This channel isn't about preaching. It's about thinking, questioning, connecting the dots between history, power, and economics. Look at today's headlines. Global inequality rising, political polarization deepening, technology outpacing ethics. Some argue this is progress, others that it's decay wearing the mask of innovation. Which do you think it is? Are we living in the golden age before the fall, or witnessing the slow-motion unraveling of a system we no longer control? Every empire, before its end, reaches a moment of reflection when the people finally ask, was it worth it? That's the moment we might be living in right now. The signs are there. Distrust in institutions, anger disguised as apathy, leaders promising change while deepening old patterns. Maybe we're still early enough to shift the direction, maybe not, but ignoring the questions has never saved a civilization before. So I'll ask you directly, what do you think defines an empire's true strength? Its armies, its economy, or the honesty of its citizens? Can a nation survive when truth itself becomes negotiable? Let me know in the comments. Your perspective helps this community grow, helps others see beyond the noise, and maybe, just maybe, helps us all avoid repeating the same mistakes that history has already written in blood and marble. Because at the end of every empire's story, it's not the rulers who decide the fate of a civilization. It's the people who dared to speak when silence was easier. When an empire falls, the world rarely notices the exact moment it dies. There is no final trumpet, no official announcement. The collapse begins quietly, in the soul of a people who stop believing. History shows us that empires don't truly die from invasion or poverty alone. They die when their myths stop working. The story that once united millions of destiny, greatness, or exceptionalism starts to sound hollow. And in that silence, something new begins to grow. Rome's fall was not the end of civilization, but the birth of Europe. The fall of Byzantium ignited the Renaissance. The collapse of the British Empire gave rise to a global network of nations and cultures it could no longer control. Even the Soviet Union's disintegration opened new frontiers. Chaotic, yes, but also creative. This is the paradox of history. Destruction and renewal are not opposites, but two sides of the same process. The ashes of an empire often fertilize the soil of what comes next. When we reach the final stage of decline, the pattern becomes painfully familiar. The system can no longer sustain itself. Corruption becomes normalized. The currency loses trust and power fragments. The military might still stand, but its purpose is hollow. Politicians talk about restoration, revival, or great again, but these are echoes of a fading dream. The true transformation never starts from the top. It starts from the periphery, from ordinary people who begin to live differently, think differently, and imagine differently. In every era of collapse, small communities emerge that redefine what survival means. They trade locally, rely on trust rather than institutions, and build networks that ignore the old hierarchies. It's almost as if, when the empire dies, the human spirit remembers how to adapt. That's the beginning of renewal. Quiet, decentralized, almost invisible. It's not about rebuilding what was lost, but about creating something wiser from what remains. If we look closely at today's world, we might already be living through this transition. Economies are fragmenting, currencies are being reinvented, power is decentralizing. The internet, once controlled by empires of information, is now a battlefield of independent creators, thinkers, and innovators. Technology, which once served empire, might become the tool that helps us transcend it. But the question remains, will we use it to free ourselves or to build new empires with digital chains? The fall of an empire is not just a geopolitical event, it's a psychological one. People must unlearn dependence, rediscover purpose, and rebuild meaning. The hardest part isn't the loss of wealth or power, but the loss of belief. When citizens no longer see themselves as part of a collapsing structure, but as architects of a new one, renewal begins. That's when humanity evolves. Think of it like a forest fire, devastating at first glance, but essential for regrowth. The old trees must fall for light to reach the ground, for seeds to sprout. Empires, too, must burn through their arrogance and illusions before the world can breathe again. It's a painful truth, but one that repeats endlessly. Collapse, in that sense, is not the end. It's the reset. So as we close this story, I want to leave you with one final thought. Every generation believes it's the last to witness greatness. Yet history proves otherwise. The cycles turn, power shifts, but humanity endures. Perhaps what we call collapse is only transformation in disguise. The universe's way of forcing us to evolve beyond our limits. If you've watched this far, thank you. You are part of a rare group, people who look beyond headlines and ask why. If you believe that understanding history helps us build a wiser future, consider subscribing, because every week we explore these deep connections between power and decay, wealth and morality, humanity and the systems it creates. Together, we decode the empires of the past to understand the one we're living in now and the one that's coming next.